Thank you for joining us for episode 2 of Human Engineering with myself, Tim Braun, and Dr. Terry Lyles. Today, we're going to be talking about performance and recovery, but first, I want to let you know who's sponsoring our podcast. Our main sponsor is Curable Premium CBD. You can find out more about Curable and all their great products at kuribl.com. And our other sponsor is E7. Terry's going to talk a little bit about them.
Yeah, it's ESVYN. That's a whole podcast in itself. I'll have Marsha on here. She can explain that to you one day, Tim. But yeah, it's my wife's company. It's a really cool company. So she does clothing design, fashion design. We sponsor race teams, and we just did a concert in LA that was sponsored with her clothing design as well. So E7.com, ESVYN.com. And we love what we're doing, just like you do at Curable. So it's great to be part of that.
Sounds good, Terry. Yeah, today we're talking about performance and recovery, and there's several different components that we'll talk about today, Terry. You mainly will take the lead on this, but the components include mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical.
That's correct.
And I think you have a little spin on that for a little different order that those come in, but why don't we dive right in?
Yeah, no, that's the exact order. Actually, I've always noted it for years as MESP, mental, emotional, spiritual, physical. And the reason is because my dissertation was on avoiding burnout. So I monitored those 4 composites of who we are as individuals. And I classify them, because I'm a race guy, like 4 wheels and tires on your car. You need all 4 of them to work correctly, to be aligned correctly, tire pressures to be correct. And as I commonly say, it doesn't take 4 flats to have a bad day. You only need 1 flat and you're off the side of the road. Your performance ended. So you could be off in one of those capacities, who you are today in this moment, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, or physically, and you're off to the side of the road calling AAA, trying to get some repair or doing it yourself. So everything I talk about is aligning those 4 capacities together all through the day in our performance. But the key, like you mentioned in the top, is how do you recover throughout the day to make sure that your proper air pressures in those tires stay where they're supposed to be, so we can run at optimal speed through the day, Mach 2 with our hair on fire, and not hit any walls.
Great. Well, one of the things I want to talk about, besides how we maximize our performance and recovery, is the work you've done in biometrics. I've got this Whoop strap that kind of measures my biometrics every day, and every morning I log on to see what kind of a recovery rate I had. And the recovery on Whoop strap is really based on physical, but I'm curious as to how some of these other components would factor into a physical response. So on the Whoop strap, what they're measuring is heart rate variability, respiratory rate, resting heart rate, and your sleep, the amount of sleep you get. And, what the Whoop strap doesn't tell you is, and I don't know how you would do a study of this, but I think you're all over this, is so if I wake up in the morning when Whoop strap says I had a great recovery, but I don't feel 100%.
Right.
On another day, I might have a 70% recovery, but I feel on top of the world and my attitude's good. I'm wondering how all of that kind of plays together. So how these other components kind of tie in to, the level of performance and recovery. And if you can measure these non-physical components through physical biometrics.
Yeah, it's a great long question. And it's very appropriate, very astute, because you're exactly right. And I used to walk up to people and say, so what's your heart rate? They would look at their Whoop or Apple and they'd be like, I'm 72 beats a minute. I go, great. What does that mean? They're like, I don't know. I mean, based upon what? It's data. I don't know. Well, you got to help me. So what I have done for years is use that physical metric system you just mentioned in the recovery side and the stress side, because everything's stress and recovery. So an EKG or an EEG, stress recovery, that's the bumping of what you see on a screen. A flat line is a really bad day. That means there's no bumping going on. Okay. You flatlined, you're dead. So stress and recovery is how we're wired mechanically, physiologically, and from an energy standpoint. So to your point, your first point, when you can see your physical attributes, what does that mean to the mental, emotional, and spiritual capabilities, or the other three wheels on the car?
Right.
And what's interesting is all four of those are connected as what we consider a cybernetic loop. They all impact each other. So you recall 2015, I can't believe it's already been that long. I was the first one to use the biometric system we have at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. And you can Google it, look it up online. And we had 3 drivers wired up. One of them, James Hinchcliffe, almost killed himself before the race wearing the strap. Literally hit the wall, shish kebab in the car, had to leave the rest of that year, come back recovered, which we also helped him recover that process. So what we saw at 230 miles an hour was a heart rate, a breath rate, and calories burned per minute. And they burn about 12 to 13 calories a minute at 230 miles an hour working in the car in a cockpit temperature of about 138 degrees. So to give you an idea, that's like wearing a ski suit in an oven at 138 degrees for 4 hours, and your resting heart rate is about 140 beats a minute in the car. It can bounce up to 190 beats a minute. So that gives you an idea of the biometrics and the physiological stress and strain of an athlete in a race car. And we've done 4 years of training with fighter pilots in the Air Force with F-18 and F-22 Raptor pilots. So what we do is we debrief afterwards. So we can see their heart rate, we see their breath rate, like you mentioned. What does that mean in the other 3 capacities? Well, here's the power of this. You said something really important. You could sleep and say, and your Whoop says, wow, great recovery, but you don't feel 100%. That's because your spiritual side of your tire was flattened. You didn't release that before you went to bed, which means you had weird dreams or you were agitated and it kept you moving through the night. And true recovery and sleep cycle is motionless recovery every 90 minutes. So believe it or not, we recover even on our sleep cycles. We roll over, we uncover, we cover, we take a drink of water, we go to the bathroom, depending on what's going on in your world. Those are all small bits of recovery, even in our sleep cycles. So all these are interconnected. So what I teach people to do is, how do you clear your mind before bed? How do you, relax your emotions and release anything that could be agitating? Spiritually, what I mean by that is connected to our purpose. Hey, I had a great day. I accomplished what I needed to. I feel good today. I say a prayer, I meditate, and I go to sleep. That will equate to a more holistic sleep cycle. So on a machine, I could show you by your watch one day. Maybe we'll do this. We'll go into a system. I'll show you, okay, this is what that means, but here's what it means at this level. Because all you're seeing is the physiological data. You don't know how to combine it with all the other 3 categories.
So so that brings me to my next question. So using biometrics, that measures all these physical attributes.
Sure.
If you were able to maximize all 4 components,
yes,
theoretically, could that bump you to 100% recovery?
100% performance. It would
or 90,
yeah,
let's say an improved performance.
Correct.
Because there's a lot of components into this, and I'll look at the recovery and I'll go, well, what did I eat yesterday?
Yes.
Because I can tell my recovery varies based on my diet as well.
Right.
And I'm just, and I know when I've, looked at my Apple Watch and my heart rate's a little high, I have the ability to sit back, calm myself down, and watch my heart rate lower. And I think, training yourself on some of these things, I guess what I'm thinking of is, what you need to develop, Terry, is the next level of biometrics, one that measures not only those 4 physical attributes, but emotional, spiritual, and mental.
Yes.
And I don't know how we do that, but because one of the other questions I had is, I get these daily biometric reports from Whoop, and you can get, you can see what your heart rate variability is at any moment, but there's no compilation of that data to tell you where you're at in the recovery cycle or how you're doing. And I'm wondering if, short of new wearable technology, if you have some ideas on how, as you go through the course of your day, you may not be maximizing any one of those four components, what kind of things can you be aware of that you might say, geez, maybe I need to focus a little more on the spiritual right now,
Yes.
maybe I shouldn't be so emotional right now because it's hurting my recovery,
Yeah.
or I'm not focused.
Right. No, it's great because, I'm actually working. It's been kind of a contracted kind of thing that's been going on an app that would literally take your physical biometrics and do a compilation of how that blends into the mental, emotional, spiritual, the other three wheels on the car. And it's a series of questions of stress and recovery. As an example, if I found myself more distracted today, or not being able to concentrate, which is another form of distraction, whatever that could have been, obviously I'm lower in that category. Had that affect my emotional, spiritual, and physical side? It did impact it, and vice versa. So it's like four cups, I'd say, and you can put all these cups together, and each of those four cups fit inside of each other. And if you mark the bottom of them, you could pull the top one out, and the first one today is physical. I have good energy. I felt good. I'm ready to go today. But my bottom cup could be emotional. Like I had an argument with my wife, and I'm not there 100%. So that drags my energy level down on the physical side, and vice versa. It could be a spiritual thing. Like, I hate my job today. I'm not purpose aligned. I don't want to do this podcast, bro. I just don't want to be here. You see, if that's the case, I just drug all four of those down. You see, so it's all about how do we identify what's really happening inside of us. The physical just becomes the backdrop. It's a litmus test. It just basically says, here's what your body is doing. But if you know what you're looking at, by understanding what your body's doing, we build a hypothesis that is pretty accurate on what's happening mentally, emotionally, and spiritually by a quick series of questions. And by doing that, it comes up with a graph that says, here's what pulled you down today. You did not have good emotional recovery. You had an argument with your wife last night. You didn't sleep well. You woke up this morning. You're still pissed off. You went to work. You didn't deal with it. And now it's dragging you down today. You're still doing your job, but you're at about 70%. You're leaving about 30% on the table of sales, marketing, advertising, networking. And it had nothing to do with work, had nothing to do with your wife. It says, I didn't recover from it.
Right.
See, so those are the impactful things of work, relationships, and sport performance that all melds together.
Right. One of the things I was thinking of as you were, going through that there is one of the things that's helped me deal with stress over the last 40 years and turn stress, bad stress into good stress, is some of these key things like what we talked about last week. Earl Nightingale saying, when you get bad news, say, what's good about this? Or you saying, when there's danger or stress, don't run away from it, run towards it. Yes. And I'm wondering if, you probably have some more of these little slogans that we can embed in our minds. So when we go towards an emotional problem, like fighting with your wife or something, you all of a sudden remember, something like run towards the danger, not away from it. I don't know if that means run towards the dishes flying your way, or what would
that be in an argument with your spouse, significant other? That means I run toward it, which means I make it my motto to be the first one to say, I'm sorry.
Right.
I identify the problem. I may not even understand the problem because, I have too much testosterone. So I may not get it. I may have to figure it out first and go back. But I make it my goal to be first to run toward it and say, listen, I'm sorry. Let's figure this out. So that's running toward it versus avoiding it. Because if you avoid that, it pulls you down and you have what I call leakage. You can have mental, emotional, spiritual, or physical leakage. And I say from the Navy guys, listen, and gals, it doesn't take too many portholes to be left cracked open when you say dive, 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 that you're going to have a problem.
Right.
You got to close them all up.
Yeah. And we're not talking about fighting, but any kind of confrontation.
Any resolution necessary. Yeah.
A customer, a business associate, a family member, or anything. It seems to me, as we're just going back and forth here, kind of the primary thing that causes arguments, and tell me if I'm wrong or correct me or add to this any way you want to, but is I think as I look back on every single argument I've ever been in, is it's one person driving the argument by not willing to admit they were wrong or not willing to listen. And, and typically arguments are all about one person sticking to their guns and not moving.
Yes. Yeah. And again, this is a whole nother podcast, but that's inflexibility. And
Right.
there's a polarity between flexibility and inflexibility. And obviously from a sports standpoint, because people can realize that analogy better physically, like, watching your biometrics physically, if you're inflexible, you're more prone to injury or danger because something's going to snap or break. Recovery builds flexibility mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. So if you don't train to be flexible mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, you're not going to perform at your highest level. And we saw this a lot with professional athletes. I mean, I've been in sports science for 20 years, and we'd see NFL players, NBA players, and back then we were having them dance with people like my wife to do, ballet. And you got this 340-pound, football player, and he's like, dance? I mean, why would I do that? I don't even know how to dance. And people like her would come into and say, listen, if you just learn the movements of what I give you, it's going to give you better balance, better agility, better flexibility, which equals stronger performance, which means now you're bigger, better, stronger, right? And it took off 20 years ago. And dance is a regular theme now of training with professional athletes so they understand that flexibility is one of your greatest assets. And most people we saw, like in the 80 percentile, were strong, but they were not flexible, which means they were prone to injury. So again, you can track all these things back.
Right.
Mentally inflexible, emotionally inflexible, spiritually inflexible. What does spiritually inflexible mean? What you just said. That means your idea is wrong and my idea is right.
Right.
That's inflexible. I've got to at least consider, you may have a different idea that ends up with a better resolution, but because I didn't think about it, I'm not going to have it. You see, that's inflexibility, which means breakage. That means arguments turned into bigger arguments. Deals get broken down. Tendons tear, muscles tear. You see, so this whole, and again, we'll probably have to get into this on another podcast, but flexible and inflexible is huge. And again, the average person doesn't see it that way in those four capacities.
All right. That's great. Well, this has been really great today, Terry. I think, the next step, it's one thing to talk about performance and recovery as part of human engineering, but you brought it up. Training for performance and recovery is another whole component of this and piece that we'll be exploring in future podcasts. And we'll have some of those big NFL players on here to talk about their dance training and what it's meant to them.
I'll have my wife Marsha on, who was on Broadway. So, she's a trained dancer and singer, and she could tell some stories of, just what's interesting about that.
And as you mentioned the singing, I think about a couple of different things that bring in singing and dancing.
Yes.
My mother, who passed away last fall, her favorite movie was Singing in the Rain.
Yeah.
And, it kind of summed up, at her funeral, we played Singing in the Rain at the end of the service as everybody was walking out, and it started raining outside and everything, but there was an uplift to everything.
Sure.
And, I've got a picture here in the house that said, life isn't about waiting for the storm. It's about learning to dance in the rain,
Absolutely.
And so that is, with her singing, the other piece that I know is emotionally uplifting. And I think about this all the time when I'm usually on a plane, listening to my music, and I'm listening to 70s classic rock and Motown stuff.
Right.
And it's all positive, Sugar Pie Honey Bunch, you sent me the Temptations video from over the weekend.
Yeah.
And all of that music, even watching them dance as they're singing, have these huge smiles on their face. You can't help but feel emotionally and spiritually uplifted.
Absolutely.
So those are other areas we'll get into in
Yeah.
coming episodes.
And you mentioned, I've been doing this so long, I guess I probably just take it for granted because it's all I know. You could ask me something else and I'm probably clueless, but this is what I know. This is what I've studied my entire life. But I don't take that for granted either, because if I go to my mechanic that takes care of my car, I don't need to know how he or she's going to repair it. I just want the lights to go off on the dashboard. Can you just fix the lights? I don't want to see red lights and yellow lights, and I just make them all go away. And they do. You take it in, they do maintenance, which is recovery, and they make the lights go away. Okay. So if you want some of those lights to go away, my latest book called Performance Under Pressure, you can find it at Amazon. We have discounted rates on my website, terrylyles.com, TerryLyles.com. And all the metrics are in there. So chapter by chapter, I go through each of those quadrants, who we are mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically. So it's a lot to cover in a short podcast from week to week to week to week. We could do this for a year and only scratch the surface. So I challenge you, if you have other issues, you want that, terrylyles.com, and you can see that with Curable, as Tim had mentioned, which is one of our sponsors, or e7.com as well.
Right. Great. So today's broadcast was brought to you by E7, and is it e7.com?
Yes.
And what was it? E7YN?
It's called ESVYN.
Okay.
And there's a whole story. We'll have to do a podcast just on that, because we couldn't get.
We'll have to get another graphic up behind you so you can see that.
I will.
TerryLyles.com above your right shoulder there. Yeah.
There you go.
So anyway, and Curable's website, be sure to check out products for your entire family, including your animals. And I know we're coming out with some new products, exciting products, one that you and I have been working on, Terry, that we'll talk about in the future. So Curable's website is KURIBL.com. And until next week, great to see you again, Terry. This was fun. And I already feel like my recovery has gone to a whole new level today.
Right.
Just sitting here talking. So
as
it always is, Terry, when we talk. So, all right. Thanks. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.